The camera flashes exploded like fireworks when Jeffrey Morrison pulled Chloe Hartley by the waist and kissed her with an intensity that made photographers jostle for better angles. It was the kind of kiss that ended careers or launched them, depending on which side of the equation you stood. Chloe melted into his arms, her fingers intertwined in his hair, her red Valentino dress shimmering under the relentless lights of the Grauman's Chinese Theater red carpet. She had waited 2 years for this moment, 2 years of secret meetings in discreet hotels, deleted messages, and carefully constructed lies. Now, finally, Jeffrey Morrison had publicly chosen her. Reporters shouted questions that were lost in the controlled chaos of the Midnight Confessions premiere, the psychological thriller promising to be the film of the year. Chloe felt her legs tremble, not from nervousness, but from pure euphoria. At 27, she had finally made it. Not just a leading role in a major studio film, but the most powerful man in Hollywood at her feet. Jeffrey pulled back just enough to whisper in her ear, his husky voice carrying a promise she had yearned to hear. "I don't care what they say anymore. You're mine." The words were nectar on her lips. Chloe turned to the cameras, her smile radiant, Jeffrey's hand firmly resting on the small of her back. She could imagine the next morning's headlines, her name finally associated with something more than promising actress or new discovery. Now it would be the woman who conquered Jeffrey Morrison. What Chloe couldn't see, lost in her bubble of triumph, was the black Lincoln Navigator that had just pulled up at the end of the red carpet. Margaret Morrison emerged from the vehicle with the icy grace of an executive who had built empires while others slept. At 43, she maintained the sharp elegance that had made her one of the most feared and respected producers in the industry. Her black Armani dress was simple, almost severe, but every inch of her exuded power. Margaret didn't run. She didn't scream. Her calculating blue eyes swept the scene before her with the same efficiency with which she analyzed scripts and contracts. She saw everything she needed to see. Her husband's hand on that girl's waist, the smeared lipstick, his arrogance in thinking he could publicly humiliate her and get away with it. A nervous assistant approached her, but Margaret dismissed him with a subtle gesture. She opened her Hermes bag and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. Inside, 3 typed pages contained words that would transform the premiere night into a battlefield. Chloe was posing for another round of photos when she felt Jeffrey stiffen beside her. Following his gaze, she saw the woman in black walking towards them with measured steps. Recognition hit her like a punch to the gut. Margaret Morrison, the wife. The executive producer of 7 of the top 10 highest-grossing films of the last decade. The woman who, rumors whispered, had half of Hollywood in her pocket. The red carpet, moments before a stage of celebration, transformed into a gladiatorial arena. Photographers smelled blood in the water and repositioned themselves frantically. This was the kind of moment that sold millions of magazines and generated weeks of headlines. Margaret stopped 10 feet from the couple, her posture impeccable. She didn't look at Chloe, as if the young actress were less significant than the air she breathed. Her eyes fixed on Jeffrey with a coldness that made even the most seasoned reporters step back. "Margaret," Jeffrey began, his voice losing all its previous confidence. "No." Margaret's word cut through the air like a blade. "You had your chance to speak. Now it's my turn." She turned to the group of journalists, her voice clear and controlled, each word chosen with surgical precision. "Good evening. I know you are all here to celebrate the launch of Midnight Confessions, a film in which I have invested considerable time and resources. However, I feel I must clarify a personal situation that, apparently, my husband decided to make public. The silence that fell over the red carpet was absolute. Even the traffic on Hollywood Boulevard seemed to have stopped. This afternoon, I initiated divorce proceedings against Jeffrey Morrison. Margaret maintained her professional tone, almost as if she were announcing a new project. Our prenuptial agreement, signed 15 years ago, is quite clear regarding the division of assets in cases of proven infidelity. Jeffrey will receive exactly what he brought into our marriage: his reputation as an actor and personal belongings acquired before 2009. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Jeffrey, expecting him to deny, to fight, to do something. But the man beside her seemed to have shrunk, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. Margaret continued, relentless. To clarify for those present and anyone who may have doubts, the Malibu house is in my name. The New York penthouse, in my name. The 3 production companies that manage Mr. Morrison's career are, and always have been, subsidiaries of Morrison Entertainment, my company. His contracts for the next 4 films, including the Midnight Confessions sequel, were negotiated through my company and contain moral conduct clauses. Every word was a bullet, carefully aimed to destroy not only Jeffrey, but the fantasy Chloe had built. The young actress looked around, searching for friendly faces, but found only looks of pity and, worse, malicious amusement. Hollywood loved to see rising stars fall. "Margaret, can't we discuss this in private?" Jeffrey finally found his voice, but it sounded small, desperate. "No." Margaret turned to him for the first time, and Chloe saw something flash in those blue eyes. It wasn't anger, but something deeper, more dangerous. Disappointment. "You chose to make this public. Kiss your mistress in front of 50 cameras, Jeffrey. Now live with the consequences." She extended the white envelope to the nearest reporter, a Los Angeles Times veteran who seemed unable to believe his luck. "This is my official statement. The divorce details and professional implications are all documented. You have my permission to publish everything." Margaret turned on her heel with lethal grace and began to walk away. Then she stopped and looked over her shoulder, her eyes finally landing on Chloe. The gaze lasted only 3 seconds, but it was enough for the young actress to understand the message. "You've won nothing, child. You've merely inherited my scraps." Chaos erupted as soon as Margaret got into her car. Reporters swarmed forward like piranhas, their questions overlapping in a deafening cacophony. Jeffrey tried to take Chloe's hand, but she instinctively pulled away, the glamour of the night evaporating like smoke. Chloe looked at the man beside her, truly seeing him for the first time. Without Margaret's power behind him, Jeffrey Morrison was just a 42-year-old actor with a few lines forming, and a career built on someone else's money and connections. She had traded her reputation, her future, for a man who was now worth no more than her own shattered ambition. Chloe's phone vibrated in her clutch. A message from her agent, just 3 words. "We need to talk." More notifications began to pour in. News alerts, messages from friends, unknown numbers. Her life was being dissected in real time, and the story emerging was not one of great romantic conquest, but of a foolish young woman who had destroyed everything for a married man who had nothing to offer. Jeffrey pulled her away from the cameras, leading her inside the theater where the screening had already begun. The red and gold corridor, which moments before had seemed like the path to her dreams, now resembled a hallway to an execution. The interior of the Chinese theater offered only an illusion of refuge. The red velvet-lined walls and golden Oriental-style ornaments couldn't drown out the growing buzz from outside. Jeffrey guided Chloe down a side corridor, away from guests who were starting to whisper and point, their phones already alight with the night's first viral news. Chloe stumbled in her 12-centimeter Jimmy Choo heels, her hand seeking support on the cold wall. The adrenaline that had sustained her on the red carpet was dissipating, leaving in its place a growing nausea. She could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, even without seeing them directly. Hollywood was a small town disguised as a metropolis, and news like this spread faster than wildfires in the Californian summer. "Chloe, listen." Jeffrey tried to hold her arm, but she flinched from his touch. Something fundamental had broken the moment Margaret uttered those devastating words. "She's overreacting. Margaret has always been dramatic when it comes to business." The laugh that escaped Chloe's lips was harsh, almost hysterical. "Dramatic? She just dismantled you on national television." Her voice rose an octave, echoing down the empty corridor. "You told me your marriage was just on paper, that you had your own money, your own career." Jeffrey ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, undoing hours of his personal stylist's work. Under the harsher lights of the corridor, Chloe could see the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "I have a career," he replied, but the conviction in his voice had evaporated. "I'm a respected actor. Directors want me in their films." "Directors want funding," Chloe cut in, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place with painful clarity. "And your wife controls the money," she corrected herself bitterly. "Your ex-wife." Chloe's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She finally pulled it from her clutch, her stomach churning with each new notification. TMZ, page 6, Variety, deadline. All with variations of the same devastating headline. Red carpet scandal. Jeffrey Morrison loses everything after public kiss with mistress. But it was the personal texts that truly cut deep. Her agent, Diana, had sent 7 messages, each more urgent than the last. Chloe opened the conversation with trembling hands. "3 brands have already canceled your endorsement deals. Universal wants to talk about your role in the next project. Chloe, you need to call me now." The last message had arrived 2 minutes ago. "I've received confirmation. Margaret Morrison is executive producer of Summer Heights, the film you were in final negotiations for. We've just been informed they are exploring other options." The corridor began to spin. Chloe leaned against the wall, the Valentino dress that moments before made her feel like a star, now weighed like a shroud. Summer Heights was supposed to be her big break, a period drama that critics were already predicting as an Oscar contender. The role had practically been written for her, or so her agent had said. Now she understood. It hadn't been written for her. It had been offered to her because Margaret Morrison, in her infinite and calculated generosity, had allowed it. "How much did you know?" Chloe turned to Jeffrey, her voice low and dangerous. "About the control she had over your career. About the contracts, the companies, everything." Jeffrey couldn't look directly at her. "I knew Margaret was well-connected. But we built this together, Chloe. I brought the talent. She brought the business acumen." "Business acumen," Chloe repeated, each word dripping with sarcasm. "That's an interesting way to describe total control." She took a step towards him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. "You made me believe you were choosing me over her, that you were risking something. But you weren't risking anything, were you? You were just being the arrogant fool you've always been, thinking you could have everything without consequences." The door at the end of the corridor opened, and a production assistant appeared, his face tense with discomfort. "Mr. Morrison, the screening is starting. The producers are. They'd like to know if you plan to attend the film or—" "Tell them I'll be there in a minute," Jeffrey cut in, his voice carrying a last shred of authority. The assistant hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more, but thought better of it and quickly retreated. The door closed with a soft click that sounded loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. Chloe watched the closed door and, for the first time since Margaret had appeared, felt the true magnitude of what she had lost. It wasn't just about Jeffrey, about a relationship doomed from the start. It was about everything she had built, every carefully cultivated connection, every favor exchanged, every forced smile at industry events. Hollywood operated on social currency, and she had just publicly declared herself bankrupt. "I need to go," she said abruptly, already moving away down the corridor. "Chloe, wait." Jeffrey caught up to her, his hand closing around her wrist. "We can't just run away. We have to face this, together. We're a couple now, remember? This is what you wanted." She looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. In the secret meetings, the dinners at discreet Santa Monica restaurants, in his penthouse when Margaret was filming on location, Jeffrey Morrison had seemed like a prize to be won. The most desirable man in Hollywood, choosing her above all others. Chloe had convinced herself it was love, that it was destiny, that it would be worth any sacrifice. Now, under the cruel fluorescent light of the theater corridor, she saw what he truly was. A frightened middle-aged man, clinging to a woman 20 years his junior because his own relevance was slipping through his fingers. She had been a distraction, a validation of his ego, never a true partner. "Let go of me," Chloe said calmly, and something in her tone made Jeffrey recoil immediately. She began to walk down the corridor, her heels clacking a mournful rhythm against the marble floor. Her mind was already racing, calculating damages, planning strategies. Maybe she could turn this around. Maybe she could paint herself as the victim, the young actress seduced by a powerful man who lied about his situation. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was futile. Margaret had the power, the contacts, and now the moral high ground. No one in Hollywood would be foolish enough to choose Chloe's side against the woman who controlled hundreds of millions in production budgets. The side exit of the theater led to a dimly lit alley where smokers usually gathered. Chloe pushed open the emergency door, grateful to find no one. The Los Angeles night air was thick with the characteristic smell of car exhaust and heated asphalt. In the distance, she could hear the sound of sirens, a constant soundtrack to the city. She leaned against the brick wall, finally allowing the tears to come. But they were tears of anger, more than sadness. Anger at Jeffrey for lying, anger at Margaret for her surgical revenge, but mostly anger at herself, for being so foolish, so blind, so desperately ambitious that she had sacrificed everything for the wrong man. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call, not a message. The name on the screen made her heart sink further. Brandon Cole, the director who had cast her in Midnight Confessions, the film that was being screened at that very moment inside the theater. The film produced by Margaret Morrison. Chloe answered with trembling hands. "Brandon." "Chloe." His voice was carefully neutral, the kind of tone people used when they were about to deliver bad news. "Where are you? I needed air. What's going on?" A pause, too long. "Margaret just spoke to the studio executives. They're going to minimize your presence on the film's press tour. Maybe a few international markets, but nothing in the United States." Another pause. I'm sorry, Chloe. I really enjoyed working with you. Enjoyed. Past tense, as if her career was already ancient history. I understand, she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. Thanks for letting me know. She hung up before he could offer any more empty condolences. The alley spun slightly, or perhaps it was her knees giving out. Chloe slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold ground, the $15,000 dress dragging in the dirt. Uncaring. 2 years. 2 years of her life, her career, her reputation, thrown away for a man who had never been hers to begin with. The sun had already risen when Chloe finally managed to leave the alley and call an Uber. The driver, a middle-aged man who probably drove from 2 in the morning until 10 to pay the bills, didn't recognize her, or had the kindness to pretend not to. She silently thanked him for that as she sank into the back seat, watching Los Angeles awaken through the blurred window. The city looked different in the morning light. The streets that yesterday shimmered with promises now revealed their true face. Worn, dirty, indifferent to the human drama unfolding in their corners. Chloe had lived in L.A. for 6 years, but only now did she realize she had never truly seen the city. She was always rushing from one audition to another, from one event to the next, chasing a version of herself that existed only in her imagination. Her apartment in West Hollywood greeted her with the characteristic silence of spaces that felt more like hotels than homes. Chloe had moved there 8 months ago, celebrating her first major role with rent that consumed half her earnings. The minimalist white walls, the Scandinavian design furniture she had seen in a decor magazine, all now seemed sterile, lifeless, like a set designed to impress visitors who would never come. She let her clutch fall to the light wooden floor and kicked off her heels, which flew in opposite directions with vengeful satisfaction. The Valentino dress needed to be returned to the fashion house by Monday. Chloe wondered if they had already seen the photos, if they were already calculating the damage to their brand by association. They were probably drafting a statement at that very moment, distancing themselves from her with the cold efficiency of business. The full-length mirror in the hallway reflected a stranger. Smudged makeup turned her eyes into dark smears. The hair that had cost $300 to style was undone, and a dirt stain from the alley adorned the side of her red dress. Chloe stood before her own image, trying to recognize the woman staring back. Where was the girl from Fresno who had arrived in Los Angeles with 2 suitcases and unwavering determination? When exactly had she gotten lost? The phone she had silenced in the car began to vibrate against her thigh, still tucked into the secret pocket of her dress. Chloe ignored it and dragged herself to the bathroom, turning the shower to the hottest temperature she could bear. She undressed mechanically, leaving the expensive dress in a red pile on the marble floor, and stepped into the steam. The hot water burned her skin, but Chloe was grateful for the sensation. It was real, tangible, unlike the surreal nightmare of the past few hours. She scrubbed her skin until it was red, as if she could wash away not just the makeup and sweat, but all the humiliation, all the wrong choices, all the stupidity of the past 2 years. When she finally stepped out of the shower, her skin was pink and stinging, and the steam had turned the bathroom into a sauna. Chloe wiped the mirror with her palm and forced herself to look again. Without makeup, under the cruel light of the LED lamps, she looked too young and too old at the same time. 27 with the innocence in her eyes of someone who had just learned a devastating lesson. The apartment was too silent. Chloe put on a plush bathrobe she had bought on sale and walked into the living room, her bare feet leaving damp marks on the floor. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to check her phone. 243 notifications. The number flashed on the screen like a counter of her destruction. Text messages, emails, social media alerts, all mixed into a digital chaos. Chloe took a deep breath and began to scroll through them methodically. Her agent, Diana, had sent 12 more messages in the last 3 hours. The first few were urgent, almost frantic. The later ones were more controlled, professional. The last one, received 20 minutes ago, was devastatingly brief. We need to meet Monday at 9 a.m. Prepare for difficult discussions about the future of your career. Career. The word felt like a joke now. Chloe moved on to the emails. Her publicist had resigned via formal message at 3:47 in the morning. Polite, but definitive, due to unforeseen circumstances and conflicts of interest with other clients. The rest was corporate jargon that translated to, "You're too toxic for my roster." There were messages from friends too, or at least people she had considered friends. Most were curiosity, thinly disguised as concern. "Are you okay? What really happened? We need to talk." None of them sounded genuine. Chloe could imagine these same people at their Sunday brunches, dissecting her life with the same vicarious pleasure they gossiped about the latest reality TV seasons. But there was one message that made her pause, from a number she didn't immediately recognize, received at 5:15 in the morning. "I know we haven't spoken in years, but I saw the news. Remember who you were before all this. That girl still exists. Rachel. Rachel Brenner. Her roommate during her first 2 years in LA, when they both shared a tiny apartment in Koreatown and dreamed of film premieres and red carpets. Rachel had given up 3 years ago, returning to Portland to do regional theater and teach acting classes. Chloe had considered that a giving up at the time, a concession of defeat. Now she wondered who had truly understood the game. Her hands trembled as she typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Finally, she decided not to reply at all. What could she say? That Rachel was right? That Chloe had completely lost herself, chasing a version of success that was, ultimately, hollow? A knock at the door made her heart race. 3 firm knocks, quiet authority. Chloe approached the peephole cautiously, half expecting to see reporters or photographers. Instead, it was her upstairs neighbor, Marcus Chen, holding a coffee tray and what looked like a bakery bag. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, considering pretending she wasn't home. But Marcus knocked again, his voice muffled by the door. "Chloe, I know you're in there. I saw you get in an hour ago. I brought coffee and croissants. You don't have to talk, but I thought you might need something other than stale cereal." Despite everything, a small smile touched Chloe's lips. Marcus was a screenwriter, one of the good ones, who made enough from TV work to live comfortably, but had never sold his soul to the kind of production that demanded moral compromises. They had become casual friends, occasionally sharing cheap wine and complaints about the industry on nights they were both home. She opened the door. Marcus didn't make a drama of it, didn't offer false condolences or pitying looks. He simply walked in, set the coffee on the kitchen counter, and began arranging the croissants on a plate he found in the cupboard. "Extra shot of espresso. Light milk," he said, pushing one of the paper cups towards her. "And yes, I saw the news. No, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." Chloe took the coffee gratefully, the warmth of the cup in her hands a small comfort. How bad was it? On a scale of 1 to utterly destroyed. Marcus considered the question as he bit into his croissant. "Honestly, it's bad. But LA has a short memory. There have already been 3 other minor scandals this morning. That actor from Netflix got arrested for drunk driving. The pop star who was cheating with her trainer. By tomorrow, something bigger will happen. But it won't erase what happened, Chloe said softly. No, Marcus agreed, not trying to sugarcoat the truth. It won't. Margaret Morrison is relentless and has a long memory. You'll need to rebuild from scratch. And it'll be hard. But it's not impossible. Chloe sank onto the gray sofa that had cost more than the first car she ever owned. I was so foolish, Marcus. So incredibly stupid. You were human, he corrected, sitting in the armchair opposite her. You made mistakes that many people make. The difference is, you made yours in the spotlight. He paused, weighing his next words. But I don't think the biggest mistake was the affair with Morrison. I think it was forgetting why you came here. To be an actress. To tell stories, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. One is about fame and recognition. The other is about art and connection. You got lost somewhere in between. The words pierced something deep within Chloe, touching a truth she had buried under years of strategic auditions and calculated networking. When was the last time she had chosen a role because she loved the character, and not because it would bring her closer to the right people? When was the last time she had acted simply for the joy of inhabiting another life, another perspective? I don't know if I can go back, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know if there's anything left to save. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. My sister runs a small theater in Pasadena. They're doing a production of A Streetcar Named Desire next month. The budget is practically non-existent, the stage leaks, and the audience usually consists of 20 people and a few stray cats. But the director is brilliant, and the actors perform because they love it, not because they're trying to impress agents or producers. Chloe looked at him, not understanding what he was getting at. Blanche Dubois hasn't been cast yet, Marcus continued. It's yours if you want it. No expectations, no pressure. Just you and the material, remembering why you started this. The offer hung in the air between them, as fragile as it was promising. Chloe thought of Margaret Morrison, of Jeffrey, of all the studio executives and producers who would now shun her like the plague. She thought of her carefully constructed career, now in smoking ruins. Then she thought of the girl from Fresno, who had loved theater in school, who had memorized Tennessee Williams monologues just for the pleasure of the words, who had believed that telling stories could change people. That girl seemed to have existed in a different life, but perhaps there was still an echo of her somewhere. Monday at 9, I have a meeting with my agent, Chloe said finally, or ex-agent, depending on how the conversation goes. But after that, can I go to your sister's? Marcus smiled, genuine and encouraging. I'll send you the address. He stood up, leaving the rest of his coffee on the table. And Chloe, rock bottom isn't the end. Sometimes it's exactly where you need to be to remember how to climb back up the right way. After he left, Chloe sat in her silent apartment, the coffee cooling in her hands, and for the first time since the red carpet, she felt something beyond panic and despair. It was small, faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Hope. Monday arrived too quickly. Chloe spent Sunday locked in her apartment, alternating between fits of crying and periods of numbness, where she simply sat, staring at the white walls. She had turned off phone notifications after the number surpassed 500. But she could still feel the digital weight of the world judging her every move. Diana Whitmore's office was in Century City, on the 22nd floor of a glass building that reflected the Los Angeles sky in shades of blue and gray. Chloe had been there dozens of times, always with a mix of nervousness and excitement, discussing contracts and opportunities. Now, as the elevator ascended, all she felt was a nauseating emptiness. The receptionist, a young woman named Amber, who normally greeted her with a warm smile, could barely look her in the eye. "Diana is waiting for you in the conference room," she murmured, vaguely gesturing towards the corridor on the left. Chloe crossed the office under the furtive glances of assistants and other agents. She could hear whispers behind her, feel the weight of their speculations. It was like walking through a gauntlet of judgment, each step heavier than the last. Diana stood in the conference room, gazing at the panoramic city view. At 52, she was an industry veteran with a reputation for transforming unknown actresses into household names. Her black Chanel suit and impeccably cut gray hair conveyed authority and experience. When she turned upon hearing Chloe enter, her face was a carefully neutral mask. "Sit," Diana said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs around the long mahogany table. Chloe obeyed, her hands clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. A manila folder lay on the table, thick with documents. She could see her own name on the label, followed by a red stamp she couldn't decipher from where she sat. Diana wasted no time with pleasantries. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you enough not to sugarcoat it. In the last 72 hours, I've lost 3 clients. 2 are major actors who regularly work with Margaret Morrison. The third is a producer with close ties to her. All of them made it clear that my continued representation of you would be problematic for their professional relationships." The words dropped like stones into Chloe's stomach. She had expected this, but hearing it aloud made it real in a way text messages couldn't. "I understand," Chloe managed, her voice sounding stronger than she felt. "You're dropping me." Diana sighed, sinking into the chair opposite her. For a moment, the professional facade slipped, revealing something that looked like genuine weariness. "It's not that simple. I could technically continue to represent you, but it would be dishonest to pretend I can do much for you right now. Margaret Morrison doesn't just control projects. She influences decisions at 3 of the 5 major studios. Your place on the blacklist isn't official, but it might as well be." "So that's it," Chloe heard her own voice as if from a great distance. "My career is over because I slept with the wrong man." "No," Diana corrected, her voice hardening. "Your career is on pause because you made choices that ignored all the unwritten rules of this industry. You got involved with a married man, Chloe. And not just any married man, but one whose wife essentially bankrolls his existence." She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Chloe's. "I warned you a year ago, when I saw you leaving that Malibu hotel with Jeffrey. Remember what I said?" Chloe remembered. Diana had been clear, almost brutal in her assessment. "You said I was playing with fire. And you told me you could handle it, that he was going to leave Margaret, that it was true love." Diana laughed humorlessly. "How many times do you think I've heard that story? How many promising careers have I seen crumble in exactly the same way?" Anger bubbled in Chloe's throat, hot and bitter. "So you're saying it's my fault? That Jeffrey bears no responsibility in this?" "Jeffrey is a spineless idiot who's always let Margaret do the heavy lifting while he reaped the benefits," Diana said bluntly. "But he's an idiot who matters less now than you do. His career was already in decline before this. His just accelerated the inevitable. Yours, on the other hand, had barely begun." The silence in the room was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and the muffled traffic 22 floors below. Chloe looked at her hands, noticing that the nails that had been manicured for the red carpet were already chipping. "So what happens now?" she finally asked. Diana opened the folder and began pulling out documents. "Technically, Our contract has another 6 months. I can keep you officially on the client list until then. It won't do much good, but at least it won't look like I'm dropping you immediately." She pushed some papers across the table. "These are the contracts that were already in the pipeline. Most have morality clauses the studios can invoke if they choose. They probably will." Chloe flipped through the documents, each one representing a future that was evaporating. The period film Margaret had cancelled, a limited streaming series that was in preliminary negotiations, 2 advertising campaigns that would have paid her rent for the next year. "There is something," Diana said, hesitant in a way Chloe had never seen before. "An offer that came in yesterday. It's not the kind of thing we'd usually consider." Chloe looked up. "What is it?" "Reality show. Redemption Road, or something like that. They take celebrities who have fallen from public grace and put them together in a house in the middle of nowhere. The angle is image rehabilitation, second chances, that sort of thing." Diana grimaced. "It's exploitative and degrading, but it pays well. 100,000 for 6 weeks, plus bonuses depending on how long you last on the show." The idea made Chloe feel nauseous. She had spent years building credibility as a serious actress, carefully choosing projects, working with respected directors. And now she was being offered a reality show designed to capitalize on her humiliation. "No," she said firmly. "Absolutely not." Diana nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "I didn't think you would, but I needed to mention it. The money would be useful if things continue to be difficult." She paused. "Do you have savings?" Chloe thought of her bank account, which seemed impressive until she considered her monthly rent of $4,500, her car payments, the credit card bill she'd accrued buying designer clothes for industry events. "Maybe 4 months," she admitted. 5, if I cut everything non-essential." "Then you need to think strategically." Diana closed the folder with a definitive click. "My advice, for what it's worth? Disappear from public view for a while. 6 months, maybe a year. Let this blow over. Do some charity work. Show up at some low-profile events. Rebuild your image as someone humble who's learned from her mistakes." She stood, signaling the meeting was ending. "And for God's sake, stay away from married men." Chloe left the office 20 minutes later, with a stack of papers and a future that seemed nebulous at best. She stood in the parking lot next to her rented BMW, which she would need to return at the end of the month, and felt the full weight of her choices pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Jeffrey, the 10th since Saturday night. She hadn't answered any of them, but he kept trying. This one simply said, "We need to talk. Please." Chloe stared at the message for a long moment, then blocked the number. What else was there to talk about? Jeffrey had been the catalyst, but she had made the choices. She had ignored the warnings, had convinced herself that the rules didn't apply to her, that love or whatever it was justified any risk. Now she was paying the price, and no conversation with Jeffrey would change that. The address Marcus had sent led to a small theater on a Pasadena side street, tucked between a laundromat and an antique shop. The building was old, with faded red bricks and a marquee that had seen better days. There was no glamour here, no promise of fame or fortune, just a place where stories were told because someone believed they were worth telling. Chloe sat in her car across the street, watching people come and go. Young actors with backpacks and crumpled scripts, an older woman carrying boxes of costumes, a man setting up lights through the open window, whistling as he worked. They didn't know who she was. They didn't care about the scandal or the headlines or Margaret Morrison's blacklist. Here, she would just be another actress trying to do the work. Connect with a character. Tell a story. Chloe thought of Blanche Dubois, Tennessee Williams's fragile protagonist who clung to illusions of grandeur as her world crumbled. A woman who had made bad choices for understandable reasons, who had lost everything, and still tried to maintain some dignity in the process. Perhaps it wasn't so different after all. She opened the car door, the October air surprisingly crisp against her skin. Across the street, through the theater window, she could see the lit stage, empty and waiting. There were no cameras there, no photographers, just the space between the audience and the performance, that magical place where stories came to life. Chloe crossed the street, each step a choice, a small act of rebellion against everything that had broken her. Perhaps Diana was right about disappearing, but maybe there were different ways to disappear, different ways to start over. The theater door creaked open, and the smell of old wood and fresh paint greeted her like an embrace. Someone on stage looked up, shielding their eyes from the light. "Can I help you?" a female voice called out. Chloe took a deep breath, feeling something release in her chest. Some tension she had carried for so long she'd forgotten what it was like to be without it. "I'm here to audition," she said, and for the first time in days, her voice sounded firm and true. "For Blanche." The afternoon light filtered through the dusty theater windows, creating golden patterns on the worn wooden floor. Chloe stood center stage, Tennessee Williams' text in her trembling hands, facing 3 pairs of eyes that watched her from the second row. Marcus's sister, Diane Chen, was in her early 40s, with short, purple-dyed hair and an expression that blended skepticism and curiosity. "When you're ready," Diane said, her voice echoing through the empty space. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, letting the outside world dissolve. There were no cameras here, no photographers waiting to capture her mistakes. Just her and the words, and the raw truth she needed to find somewhere within herself. When she began to speak, she was no longer Chloe Hartley, the actress in disgrace. She was Blanche Dubois, clinging desperately to the fragments of lost dignity. The words flowed from her like dammed water finally finding a breach. Each line carried the weight of her own recent experience, the humiliation, the despair, the frantic attempt to maintain some semblance of control when everything was crumbling. When she finished, the silence in the theater felt alive, pulsating. Diane stood, her arms crossed, but there was something different in her eyes now. Respect, perhaps. Recognition. "Have you played Blanche before?" she asked. "In drama school, 7 years ago," Chloe replied, her voice still hoarse from the emotional intensity. "But I never truly understood the character until now." A sad smile touched Diane's lips. "It's funny how life does that, isn't it? Gives us exactly the experiences we need to understand certain truths." She exchanged glances with the other 2 assistant directors. "The role is yours, if you want it. Rehearsals start Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. We can barely pay anything, just $100 per performance. There will be 8 shows over 3 weeks. $800. Chloe thought of her last salary for a day of filming, $15,000 for 12 hours of work. The difference was comical, tragic, but as she looked around the small theater, with its patched chairs and walls that needed paint, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine purpose. "I'll be here," she said, and it was a promise to both Diane and herself. When she left the theater that afternoon, the October sun was beginning to set, painting the Pasadena sky in shades of orange and pink. Chloe sat in her car for a long moment, just breathing, feeling the gradual weight of her choices transform into something different. No longer lighter, but perhaps more honest. Her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. For an instant, she considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. It was a Variety report, published 2 hours ago. The headline made her stop breathing. Margaret Morrison announces new project, series on betrayed women in the entertainment industry. The article went on to detail Margaret's upcoming project, a limited series for a major streaming platform, exploring how powerful women in the industry dealt with public infidelity. The timing was no coincidence. It was a statement, a reminder that Margaret hadn't simply exacted revenge. She was turning Chloe's humiliation into content, into another form of power and control. Chloe should have felt anger, renewed devastation. Instead, she felt a strange clarity. Margaret had every right to be furious, to want justice. Chloe had helped destroy a marriage, had ignored the consequences of her actions because she was too caught up in her own romantic narrative. The fact that Jeffrey was also guilty didn't absolve her of her own responsibility. She typed a reply to Rachel, the message she'd left pending for days. "You were right. I completely lost myself. I'm trying to find my way back, but I don't know if it's possible. How did you know when it was time to give up?" The reply came 10 minutes later, while Chloe was stuck in Interstate 210 traffic. "I didn't give up. I just redefined what success meant to me. Regional theater in Portland doesn't pay my bills, but it reminds me why I loved acting in the first place. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what truly matters." The words floated in Chloe's mind as she drove back to West Hollywood, passing billboards advertising films and television shows, the giant faces of smiling actors promising entertainment and escapism. She had so desperately wanted to see her own face there, to be recognized, validated. Now the idea felt empty, an ambition belonging to a different person. Her apartment greeted her with the same sterility as always, but this time Chloe truly looked around. The expensive furniture she had never really chosen, just copied from design magazines. The empty walls because she had never had time to decorate them properly. The spotless kitchen because she rarely cooked, living on takeout and meals at trendy restaurants. This was not a home. It was a set, another performance in a life that had become an endless series of acts. Chloe spent the next week in a kind of self-imposed isolation. She canceled subscriptions to services she didn't use, researched cheaper apartments, began taking inventory of what she truly needed versus what she had accumulated to impress people who, she now realized, had never genuinely cared about her. It was like dismantling a version of herself piece by piece, discovering what remained when all the superficial layers were stripped away. Diana called on Thursday with news Chloe already expected. The studios invoked the morality clauses. "You're officially out of all pending projects." A pause. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I know it's not fair, but it's the reality." "I know," Chloe replied, and surprisingly, her voice was calm. "Thank you for being honest with me from the beginning." "What are you going to do?" Diana asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested genuine concern, not just professional interest. Chloe looked at the streetcar text open in her lap, the pages already marked with notes and thoughts. "I'm going to do theater. I'm going to remember why I started this." She could hear the smile in Diana's voice. "Good luck, Chloe. I truly hope you find what you're looking for." After they hung up, Chloe walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching before her. Los Angeles at night was a constellation of lights, each one representing a dream, an ambition, a story. Some of those lights glowed from mansions in the Hollywood Hills, others from tiny apartments in less glamorous areas. The value of each light wasn't in its brilliance, but in the life it illuminated. Tuesday's rehearsal brought together 10 actors in a space that smelled of fresh paint and modest aspirations. Chloe recognized a few faces from auditions over the years, people who had chosen or been forced to remain in the outer circles of the industry. They greeted her with cautious politeness, clearly aware of the scandal, but willing to give her a chance. The man cast as Stanley Kowalski was an actor named David Reyes, in his early 30s, who balanced theater work with voiceovers for commercials. He had a raw, honest presence that made Chloe immediately understand why Diane had chosen him. When they first read together, the chemistry was undeniable, not romantic, but the dramatic tension of two opposing forces colliding. "You're good," David said during the break, offering her water from a crumpled bottle. "Why haven't I seen your work before?" "Because I was busy chasing the wrong projects for the wrong reasons," Chloe replied with an honesty that surprised her. David nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "I've been there. I spent 3 years auditioning only for roles that would pay well, ignoring anything I was actually interested in. It almost made me hate acting." He took a sip of water. "Then my dad got sick, and suddenly all those worries about money and fame seemed ridiculous. He died before he saw me in anything significant, but he was in the audience for a small show I did in Echo Park, a terrible production of Waiting for Godot. He said it was the best acting he'd ever seen, because he could feel that I genuinely cared." The story touched something deep in Chloe. She thought of her own parents in Fresno, who had supported her dream of acting even when they didn't fully understand it. They had watched the film that premiered that fateful night, proud to see her on the big screen. Now she could barely look them in the eye during their weekly calls, shame weighing down every word. "Your parents saw the news?" David asked, as if reading her thoughts. "They did. My mom called crying, saying she didn't raise me to be that kind of woman." Chloe felt tears threaten, but held them back. "The worst part is, she's right. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself that love justified everything. Except it wasn't love, it was just ego and ambition disguised as romance." David offered no platitudes or false consolation. He simply nodded, acknowledging her truth without judgment. It was refreshing, this raw honesty that seemed impossible in the circles she used to frequent. Rehearsals became the anchor point of Chloe's weeks. 3 nights a week, she immersed herself in the world of Blanche Dubois, finding disturbing and revealing parallels between the character's journey and her own. Blanche, too, had made bad choices for complicated reasons, had clung to illusions because reality was too painful to face. The difference was that Chloe still had a chance to write a different ending to her story. News of the scandal gradually subsided, replaced by newer dramas and fresher scandals. Hollywood truly had a short memory, as Marcus had predicted. But the consequences for Chloe remained. Invitations to events dried up completely. Numbers that used to answer her messages now left her on red. It was as if she had become invisible to the industry that had consumed her life for 6 years. Strangely, the invisibility was liberating. Chloe began exploring Los Angeles in ways she never had before. She visited small museums instead of gala events, ate at neighborhood restaurants instead of trendy West Hollywood establishments, talked to people who had no idea who she was or of the scandal that had defined her recent weeks. Slowly, piece by piece, she began to build a life that didn't revolve around being seen, being noticed, being validated by strangers. Rachel came to visit her one weekend, driving from Portland specifically to check in. They sat in the apartment Chloe would soon be leaving, sharing cheap wine and memories of their early days in Los Angeles. "You look different," Rachel observed, studying Chloe's face. "More tired, but also more real, if that makes sense." It does, Chloe agreed. I was using so much energy maintaining a facade that I forgot what it's like to just exist without constantly performing. They watched the sunset from the window, the lights of LA beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. It was beautiful in a way Chloe had never truly appreciated before, too busy rushing to the next event, the next opportunity, the next step on the ladder that led nowhere. "What are you going to do after the play?" Rachel asked. Chloe considered the question. Her lease was up in 2 months. Her savings were dwindling faster than she cared to admit. The practical reality of her situation hadn't changed just because she had found some inner peace. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for the first time in a long time, it's okay not to know. I'm learning to build a life that doesn't depend on being on a perfectly executed 5-year plan." Rachel smiled, raising her wine glass in a silent toast. Sometimes the best plans were simply to keep moving forward, one step at a time, trusting that the path would reveal itself as you walked. Opening night arrived with a swiftness that left Chloe breathless. 3 weeks of intense rehearsals had passed in a blur of raw emotion and personal discovery. Now, as she applied her makeup in the tiny dressing room she shared with 2 other actresses, her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the familiar nervousness of big productions, that performative anxiety that fed the ego. It was something deeper, truer. A fear of failing not critics or studio executives but herself. The theater was already filling up as she peeked through the side curtains. About 80 people filled the patched chairs, a modest number that would have seemed pathetic months ago. Now it felt immense, each face representing someone who had chosen to be there, not out of social obligation or industry connections, but because they genuinely wanted to see the story that would be told. Marcus was in the 3rd row, accompanied by a man Chloe didn't recognize. Rachel had driven from Portland again, waving discreetly when their eyes met. And then, at the back of the theater, almost hidden in the shadows, Chloe saw a figure that made her heart momentarily stop. Diana Whitmore, her former agent, wearing jeans and a casual blouse, completely out of her executive uniform. David appeared beside her, already transformed into Stanley with his white t-shirt and aggressive posture. "Ready to bleed on stage?" he asked, with a smile that was half provocation, half encouragement. Chloe nodded, unable to form words. Diane Chen gathered the cast for an energy circle backstage, their hands intertwined as they shared a moment of collective silence. As the house lights dimmed and the first note of music began to play, Chloe felt the transformation happen. Chloe Hartley, the actress in disgrace, dissolved. Blanche Dubois emerged, carrying her own baggage of shame and despair. The first scenes flowed with a naturalness that surprised even Chloe. The audience was completely absorbed, their faces illuminated by the soft stage light, following every movement, every word charged with meaning. When she reached the crucial monologue, that moment when Blanche finally confesses her flaws and illusions, Chloe allowed her own pain to bleed through the character. "I don't want realism. I want magic." Tennessee Williams's words echoed through the theater, but they carried the weight of Chloe's experience. She, too, had chosen magic over reality, had built illusions because the truth was too harsh to face. The audience was so silent that the sound of someone swallowing was audible. David responded with Stanley's necessary brutality, and the tension between them electrified the air. It wasn't just acting. It was two people channeling universal truths about vulnerability, power, and the cruel ways we hurt each other. The rest of the cast orbited around them, each contributing their own nuances to the emotional tapestry of the play. The climax arrived with an intensity that left Chloe trembling. When Blanche was finally led away, destroyed but still clinging to dignity, Tears streamed freely down Chloe's face. They weren't performance tears. They were real, purging months of pain and shame and regret. She could hear muffled sobs in the audience, feel the visceral connection between stage and spectators. The lights went out. For 3 seconds, there was only darkness and absolute silence. Then the audience erupted in applause that reverberated through the old theater walls. Chloe remained center stage when the lights came back up for the bows, stunned by the intensity of the response. People were on their feet, not just politely, but with genuine enthusiasm. She saw Diana discreetly wiping her eyes. Rachel had her hands over her heart, her smile radiant even through tears. Backstage, the cast hugged in a chaotic circle of adrenaline and relief. Diane Chen appeared with red eyes and a smile that transformed her entire face. "That was extraordinary," she said, squeezing Chloe's shoulder. "You all were extraordinary." The small theater lobby buzzed with audience members who had stayed to greet the actors. Chloe found herself talking to people who had been deeply touched by the performance, sharing their own stories of loss and redemption. A woman in her 50s held her hands and said, "Thank you for being so honest. I could feel every word." Marcus pulled her into a tight hug. "You found it, didn't you? What you were looking for?" "I think so," Chloe admitted, her voice still hoarse from the night's emotional intensity. "Or at least, I've started looking in the right place." Diana Whitmore was the last to approach her, waiting until the crowd thinned. There was something different in the veteran agent's posture, a softness Chloe had never seen before. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped out onto the side street, where the October night air carried the scent of eucalyptus from the nearby trees. Diana was silent for a long moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I was wrong," she finally said, "about what I advised you to do. I told you to disappear, to hide and wait for things to cool down. But that would have just been another performance, another lie." She met Chloe's eyes. "What you just did on stage, that was the truth. Raw and painful and absolutely real." Chloe didn't know what to say. Diana continued, "I received a few calls this week, small independent productions, a director who works outside the studio system. They heard you were doing theater in Pasadena and were intrigued. They're not big offers, nothing like what you were chasing before. But they're projects with substance, directors who care more about art than profit." "You want to represent me again?" Chloe asked, uncertain if she was ready to dive back into that world. Diana shook her head. "Not the way I did before. I can't get you the big studio contracts, not for years. Margaret Morrison has a long memory and deeper connections than mine." She paused. "But if you're interested in building a different kind of career, the kind that doesn't depend on corporate approval or red carpets, then perhaps we can work together again, on new terms." The offer hung between them, complicated and tempting. Chloe thought about how much had changed in the last few weeks, how her priorities had transformed. The old dream of becoming a big star seemed to belong to someone else, a version of herself she wasn't sure she wanted to be anymore. "Let me finish this production," she said finally. "Then we can talk about the future. But I'm not looking for the same thing as before, Diana. I don't know exactly what I want, but I know it needs to be honest." Diana nodded, an expression of respect crossing her face. "Fair enough. You have my number when you're ready." She started to walk away, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Chloe, I think you're finally on the right path. It's harder, slower, but at least it's yours." After Diana left, Chloe remained on the empty street, watching the last audience members depart the theater. Rachel emerged, wrapping a scarf around her neck against the increasingly chilly night air. "Ready to celebrate?" Rachel asked. "A few of us are heading to that 24-hour diner on the corner." Chloe smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. "Absolutely." The diner was the kind of establishment that existed in every town, with overly bright fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, and coffee that was more habit than pleasure. The cast occupied 2 large booths, their voices still buzzing with post-performance adrenaline, laughing about mistakes the audience had never noticed and moments of perfect connection. Chloe was squeezed between David and one of the supporting actresses, sharing an order of fries that nobody really wanted but everyone idly picked at. It was almost 2 a.m, and she had to work the next morning at a bookstore where she'd landed a part-time job. But in that moment, with these people who understood what it meant to bleed on stage for 80 strangers and minimum wage, Chloe felt richer than she ever had, wearing $15,000 dresses. Marcus raised his coffee mug in an impromptu toast to Blanche Dubois and all who depend on the kindness of strangers. "And to ourselves," David added, "who are foolish enough to do this for love instead of money." They clinked their mugs and glasses in joyful chaos, coffee sloshing onto the laminated tabletop. Chloe watched the faces around her, people who would never appear on magazine covers or amass millions of social media followers. But each of them had chosen to keep creating art because something within them demanded expression, regardless of external recognition. Her phone vibrated with a message. Instinctively, she almost ignored it, but something made her check. It was from a number she hadn't seen in weeks. Jeffrey Morrison. "Saw you're doing theater in Pasadena. Hope you're doing well. I messed everything up, Chloe. With you, with Margaret, with my whole life. Just wanted you to know I'm sorry." Chloe stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger was still there, but muted now by distance and perspective. Jeffrey had been a catalyst, but she had made her own choices. Both were responsible for the destruction they'd caused. She typed a brief reply. "I'm rebuilding. I hope you find your way too. Take care." Then she blocked the number again, not with anger, but with finality. Rachel watched her, reading the situation without needing to ask. Ready to truly move on? Chloe slid her phone back into her pocket and picked up another fry. "I think I already am. I just didn't realize it until now." The remaining 7 performances of Streetcar flew by in a blur of intense emotion and personal growth. Each night brought new insights, new moments of connection with the audience. For the final show, Chloe allowed herself to truly sink into Blanche's ultimate devastation, knowing she was also bidding farewell to her own version of that broken woman. When the curtains closed for the last time, the cast remained on stage in silence, savoring the moment. 3 intense weeks that had changed something fundamental in all of them. Diane thanked the cast with tears in her eyes, promising that this production would be remembered as one of the best the small theater had ever seen. In the dressing room afterward, as they removed makeup and costumes, David turned to Chloe. "There's another project starting in January. Samuel Beckett, Endgame. It doesn't pay better, but the material is incredible. Would you be interested?" Chloe thought about her uncertain future, about pending conversations with Diana regarding potential independent projects, about her lease ending in 6 weeks. There were so many unknowns, so many decisions yet to be made. But one thing was clear. She wanted to keep doing this kind of work, stories that mattered, even if only for small audiences in worn-down theaters. "Count me in," she said, and it was a promise to both David and herself. A promise to keep choosing substance over surface, Truth over performance. 3 months later, Chloe was sitting in a cafe in Silver Lake, waiting for Diana Whitmore. The meeting had been set a week in advance, and Chloe had spent most of that time trying to decide what she truly wanted for her future. The apartment in West Hollywood was already history. She now shared a smaller place in Echo Park with a costume designer who worked on independent productions. The rent was half of what she'd paid before, and for the first time in years, her finances weren't keeping her awake at night. Diana arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. She looked different, too, less polished, more approachable. She ordered a simple Americano and sat across from Chloe with an expression that blended professionalism and something approaching genuine friendship. "So," Diana began, opening the briefcase and pulling out some documents, "I have 3 proposals for you. None will make you rich or famous, but all are projects with artistic integrity." She slid the first document across the table. Independent film shooting in Santa Fe next summer. Tiny budget, but the script is exceptional. A story about a woman rebuilding her life after an unjust imprisonment. Chloe picked up the script, flipping through the first few pages. The writing was dense, literary, the kind of material that demanded total emotional commitment. "What's the pay?" $5,000 for the entire production, plus accommodation during filming. 3 weeks of work. Diana waited for Chloe's reaction, clearly prepared for disappointment or indignation. Instead, Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "And the other projects?" Diana seemed slightly surprised, but continued. "A web series about women in career transitions. Short episodes, lots of dialogue, an almost theatrical structure. It pays a bit better, but the exposure would be primarily online, not on traditional channels." She paused before presenting the third option. "And there's a documentary proposal. A filmmaker wants to make a film about actors working outside the studio system. He was impressed by your performance in Streetcar and wants to include your journey." The idea of exposing her personal life even further made Chloe hesitate. But something about the raw honesty of documentaries was appealing. No script, no carefully constructed performance. Just the truth, however uncomfortable. "Can I think about these options?" Chloe asked, knowing Diana expected a more definitive answer. "Of course, but the Santa Fe film starts casting in 3 weeks. If you're interested, I need to know soon." Diana closed her briefcase, studying Chloe with professional curiosity. "You've changed, you know. Not just in appearance, though that's true too. There's a quietness about you now that wasn't there before." Chloe considered the words. It was true that something fundamental had changed. The frantic urgencies that used to drive every decision had calmed, replaced by a more thoughtful consideration of what truly mattered. She was no longer chasing external validation with the desperation of someone drowning. Instead, she was building something more solid, even if slower. "I stopped running," Chloe said simply. "I used to always be racing towards the next thing, afraid that if I stopped for a second, everything would crumble. Now I understand I need to build foundations before I build towers." Diana smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually serious face. "That's the wisest thing I've heard you say." She finished her coffee, preparing to leave. "Think about the proposals. And Chloe, whatever you decide, I'm proud of the work you're doing. It's the kind of career that lasts, that means something." After Diana left, Chloe remained in the cafe, flipping through the Santa Fe film script. The protagonist was a woman named Anna, convicted of a crime she didn't commit, struggling to rebuild relationships shattered by years of forced separation. There were obvious parallels to Chloe's own experience, though the circumstances were dramatically different. But the emotional essence resonated. The difficulty of rebuilding trust, of forgiving oneself, of finding purpose after having everything stripped away. Her phone pinged with a message from David. Endgame cast meeting tonight, 7 o'clock. You coming? Chloe smiled, typing a quick reply. I'll be there. The following weeks unfolded at a pace that was simultaneously exhausting and deeply satisfying. Late-night rehearsals for Endgame, shifts at the bookstore during the day, weekends spent reading scripts and considering options for the future. It was a very different life from the one she had imagined when she arrived in Los Angeles 7 years ago, but there was an authenticity to it that the previous version had never possessed. Marcus invited her to a dinner at his apartment, a casual gathering of creative friends that had become a monthly event. Chloe climbed the familiar stairs, carrying a bottle of cheap wine and a quiet expectation of good company. The apartment was filled with people she'd met through theater, actors, writers, a musician who composed scores for independent films. Conversation flowed easily, moving from current projects to passionate debates about art and commerce, the eternal tension between creative integrity and economic necessity. Chloe found herself contributing perspectives she wouldn't have had months ago, informed by her downfall and rebuilding. A man she didn't know, perhaps a few years older than her, observed the conversation from the corner of the sofa. When their eyes met, he smiled in a way that was friendly without being predatory. During a natural lull in the larger conversation, he approached her in the kitchen, where she was refilling her wine. Daniel Ortega, he introduced himself, extending his hand. I direct documentaries, mostly profiles of artists working outside the mainstream spotlight. Chloe recognized the name immediately. This was the filmmaker Diana had mentioned, interested in including her in his project. Chloe Hartley, she replied, shaking his hand. I think you want to put me in one of your films. Daniel chuckled, a genuine laugh that reached his eyes. Straight to the point. I like that. He leaned against the counter, his demeanor relaxed but focused. I watched you in Streetcar. 3 times, actually. There was something profoundly honest in your performance, a vulnerability you don't often see. Afterward, I did some research and found out about the scandal, about how you ended up in that small theater. Chloe felt the old defensiveness rise, but forced it down. Daniel wasn't judging. He was observing with the professional curiosity of someone interested in human stories. And you thought my downfall would be good entertainment for your documentary? She kept her tone light, but there was a serious question beneath it. Not entertainment, Daniel corrected gently. Truth. Hollywood is full of stories of meteoric rises and spectacular falls. But we rarely see what happens afterward, how people rebuild or fail to. You're choosing a different path than most, and that fascinates me. Chloe considered this, taking a sip of her wine. Wouldn't it be recounting the worst moment of my life for cameras? How is that different from that reality show I was offered? Because it wouldn't be about exploiting your pain for entertainment. It would be about documenting an authentic process of rebuilding. And you would have full control over what you share and what remains private. Daniel took a business card from his pocket. Think about it. There's no pressure, and if you decide you're not interested, no hard feelings. But if you're willing to consider it, I'd like to talk more deeply about the project's vision. Later that night, as she walked back to her apartment under the clear Los Angeles sky, Chloe thought about Daniel's proposal. There was a time when the idea of publicly exposing her vulnerabilities would have been unthinkable. But perhaps it was precisely this kind of radical honesty that could transform her greatest shame into something with purpose. If her story could help other people navigating their own downfalls, perhaps there was value in that. Her phone rang with an unexpected call. The name on the screen made her heart flutter slightly. Margaret Morrison. Chloe stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, her finger hovering over the answer button. She hadn't spoken to Margaret since that devastating night on the red carpet. Part of her wanted to ignore the call, to avoid any further confrontation. But another part, the new part that was learning to face difficult things instead of running away, made her answer. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, prepared for anger or new destructive revelations. Chloe Hartley. Margaret's voice was as controlled as Chloe remembered, but there was something different too. Less sharp, perhaps. "I know this call is unexpected. I'll be brief." Chloe waited, her heart thudding against her ribs. "I saw your performance in Streetcar," Margaret continued. "A friend convinced me to go, said it would be interesting. She was right." A long pause. "You were remarkable. Better than in anything I produced with you involved." The compliment was so unexpected that Chloe didn't know how to respond. Margaret didn't wait for an answer. "I'm not calling to offer forgiveness or reconciliation. What you and Jeffrey did was still profoundly wrong, and the consequences you faced were deserved." Her voice softened, almost reflective. "But I also recognize that you did something few people in this industry have the courage to do. You looked your mistakes directly in the eye and chose a different path. That takes strength." Chloe finally found her voice. "Why are you telling this to me?" "Because I spent the last few months obsessed with revenge, making sure you would pay for your role in destroying my marriage. And it worked. You lost everything." Margaret paused. "But at some point during my crusade to ruin you, I realized I was giving you and Jeffrey more power over my life than they deserved. My marriage was already dead before you came along. Jeffrey is who he is, and I chose to ignore that for years because it was convenient for my business." The words hung between them, an admission of shared responsibility that Chloe never expected to hear. "I don't expect us to be friends," Margaret continued, "and I still have enough influence to make it difficult for you to work in certain circles. But I will no longer actively sabotage your career. What you build from here is up to you." Another pause. "And for what it's worth, I think the path you're choosing, outside the mainstream spotlight, might be exactly what you need." Before Chloe could respond, Margaret hung up. She stood on the empty sidewalk, processing the surreal conversation. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something. A recognition of shared humanity, perhaps. The understanding that victim and villain narratives were rarely as simple as they seemed. Chloe continued walking, her steps lighter now. When she arrived at her apartment, she found her roommate, Lisa, watching television in the living room. Lisa looked up, noticing something different in Chloe's expression. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Chloe replied, sinking onto the sofa beside her. "Just processing that maybe redemption is more complicated than I thought." The next day, Chloe called Diana and accepted the role in the Santa Fe film. She also agreed to participate in Daniel's documentary, with the stipulation that she would have final approval over what was included. And when rehearsals for Endgame began the following week, she dove into Samuel Beckett's austere and absurd world with renewed dedication. The months that followed were some of the most challenging and rewarding of Chloe's life. Santa Fe in July was scorching, and the filming schedule was brutal. But working with a small, dedicated crew, all committed to telling a meaningful story, regardless of budgetary limitations, reminded her why she had fallen in love with acting in the first place. Daniel's documentary captured moments of her journey that she herself hadn't realized were significant. Late-night rehearsals where the cast wrestled with Beckett's material, frank conversations about rebuilding a career after public failures. A particularly vulnerable moment where Chloe finally called her parents and genuinely apologized, without excuses or rationalizations, just pure accountability. When the Santa Fe film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January, Chloe attended with no expectations beyond celebrating the work they had created together. The reception was lukewarm among critics, but some praised her performance as raw and fearless. It wasn't the kind of success that would launch a major career, but it was something better. It was validation that she was on the right path, building something sustainable instead of spectacular. Daniel's documentary premiered 3 months later at a smaller festival, and to Chloe's surprise, it sparked genuine conversations about second chances and the human cost of celebrity culture. She participated in a few discussion panels, speaking honestly about her mistakes and the rebuilding process. Some people judged her, seeing her participation as opportunistic. Others found inspiration in her willingness to be transparent about failures. One spring afternoon, almost a